The most expensive ingredient in a bottle of whiskey is time. Years the drink spent in a barrel while someone else decided when it was ready to sell. But the same complex flavor, caramel, vanilla, a smoky edge, can be achieved another way. From honey, malt, or apple juice, through fermentation alone, without a still or a barrel. The point is a character you build yourself rather than buy ready-made in a $300 bottle. 5 drinks below, 5 different recipes. But in every one of them, one and the same process decides everything. Without understanding it, none of them will come out right. It all starts with yeast. They convert sugar into alcohol, but the alcohol itself is toxic to them. When there's too much of it, the yeast dies. Ordinary yeast tolerates up to 14%. Specialist strains like EC1118 handle 18 to 20. That's the ceiling fermentation can't rise above, no matter how much sugar you add. Where fermentation hits that ceiling, cold steps in. Sugar in apple juice lowers the liquid's freezing point, so when juice is chilled to -8 to -15 degrees, water turns to ice crystals faster than sugar does, and the unfrozen fraction comes out 2 to 3 times sweeter than the original. The key point: this happens before fermentation with juice rather than finished alcohol, so it counts as concentrating sugar, not distillation, and requires no license. Wood works on a different principle: extraction. Toasted oak gives the spirit vanillin, guaiacol, and tannin the same way a barrel does, only over weeks of immersion rather than years of aging. The final lever is fermentation temperature itself. A warmer environment pushes yeast to produce sharper, more alcoholic tones. A cooler one favors softer, fruitier esters. That's why cold fermented cider and warm fermented Belgian quadruple are conscious flavor choices. On to the recipes. Start with honey. Dissolve 5 kilograms of honey in 10 liters of warm water at no higher than 40 degrees. Above that, the yeast dies from heat shock before it starts working, and fermentation either won't start at all or wild bacteria from the air will take over, giving a sour, vinegary taste instead of the expected sweetness. Add EC1118 yeast and a nutrient supplement, because pure honey contains almost no nitrogen needed for healthy fermentation. And add the supplement in 2 or 3 separate portions over the first weeks, rather than all at once on day 1, otherwise the yeast stalls halfway through, leaving a weak, unstable mead capable of re-fermenting inside a sealed bottle. Keep the mixture at 18 to 22 degrees for 6 to 8 weeks until bubbles in the airlock stop completely, then let the mead rest for another month in a cool, dark place. During this time, the yeast sediment settles to the bottom on its own, and the drink clears without filtering. The result is a golden amber mead, dense as a dessert wine, with caramel and floral bitterness. English barley wine follows a different logic, because here the source of strength is not honey, but malt at high concentration. The wort density should be 1,110 to 1,120 points, nearly double that of an ordinary ale. Boil it for 90 minutes instead of the usual 60, so part of the sugar is caramelized directly in the kettle, and that's where the nutty caramel flavor usually attributed to a barrel actually comes from. Fermentation takes 3 to 4 weeks at 18 degrees, and bottle conditioning takes at least 3 months. Complex esters form slowly, and most home brewers give up right here, uncorking after 2 weeks and deciding the recipe failed, when in reality they simply didn't give the drink enough time to rest. Belgian quadruple is made on a similar principle, but with different emphases, and the patience required is even greater. Dark candy sugar replaces part of the malt, giving notes of dried fruit and caramelized molasses, which is why this ale is the closest of all the home options to sherry or port. The yeast needs to be a Belgian ale strain tolerant of 14 to 16%, and fermentation is best done at room temperature, 22 to 24 degrees, warmer than usual for ale, because warmth is precisely what drives the spiced phenolic flavors the entire style exists for. Conditioning here is longer than for barley wine, 6 months minimum, and even 3 months is considered too early. Opening a quadruple too soon is like tasting whiskey straight from the still. Ice cider dispenses with malt and the yeast sealing all together. Here cold does the work. Freeze freshly pressed apple juice in a thin layer in a shallow tray rather than a solid block in a standard freezer. A thick block freezes slowly. Large ice crystals trap some of the sugar along with the water, and the concentrate comes out weaker than expected. At minus 15 degrees, pour off the unfrozen concentrate after 12 hours, roughly a third of the original volume, but with double the sugar content. Ferment it with white wine yeast for 6 weeks at 12 to 14 degrees. Slow, cold fermentation preserves the fruit esters that would simply evaporate in warmth. After fermentation, let the cider rest in the cold for another 2 to 3 months, so residual sugar can balance the acidity. The last option is not a separate drink, but a way to add barrel character to any of the previous 4 without a barrel. Take a finished barley wine or quadruple and add 100 grams of toasted oak cubes per 10 liters. Toasted specifically because raw oak from a shop without heat treatment gives excess tannin and a puckering, almost woody taste that no amount of filtering can fix later. Toast the oak and advance in the oven at 180 degrees for 20 minutes. This chemically converts some of the tannin into vanillin before it ever contacts the drink. Keep the oak in the drink for 2 to 4 weeks, tasting weekly. Leave it too long and the flavor starts resembling pencil shavings rather than a barrel. Some of the oak cubes can be replaced with cherry or apple wood. They give less vanillin, but add a gentle tartness. The finished drink comes out the color of strong tea, with an aroma of vanilla and smoke, and it's the one most often mistaken for genuine barrel-aged whiskey in blind tastings. One final thing worth considering once all 5 are ready: don't store them all in the same place. Mead and ice cider age best in the cool, closer to 10 to 12 degrees, while barley wine and quadruple prefer room temperature at 18 to 20. Keeping everything in one refrigerator or one warm storage space most often hurts the mead. It either ages too slowly in warmth or goes dormant in the cold, never quite reaching its 18% ceiling. At the start of fermentation, you'll see active foam on the surface and hear steady bubbling in the airlock, roughly once a second for mead or ale in the first 3 to 4 days. If there are no bubbles after 12 hours of adding the yeast, it's a sign the yeast hasn't taken hold and the temperature of both the liquid and the air around the vessel needs checking. In the middle of the process, around the 2nd week, the foam settles and the smell shifts from sharp and yeasty to softer and fruitier. For quadruple and barley wine, a faint smell of clove or a black pepper appears at this stage. That's the phenolic compounds from the Belgian yeast working, a sign of a normal process rather than a spoiled drink. Toward the end of fermentation, bubbles in the airlock slow to once every 30 to 60 seconds, and then stop completely for 2 consecutive days, only then is fermentation genuinely finished. The flavor at this point should be dry, with no perceptible sweetness and a light, lingering bitterness on the tongue. For ice cider, the sign of success is different. The concentrate after freeze concentration should be thick, almost syrupy, and stick to the spoon when you test it. If it's as fluid as ordinary juice, the freezing was either too short or too warm, and the concentration needs to be repeated. For the ale with oak cubes, the signal is color. In the first week, the drink barely darkens. By the second week, it takes on a distinct amber-brown tone, similar to weak tea. If the color keeps deepening past the third week and the flavor starts to resemble wet cardboard, pull the oak out immediately. That's tannin beginning to overwhelm everything else. Once the basic 5 drinks are coming out consistently, the techniques can start to be combined. And that's where the most interesting results appear. The first variation: blend finished strong mead with the oak cubes from the 5th recipe. The result is something between sherry and bourbon that doesn't exist in any store. The second: replace part of the malt and barley wine with smoked malt used for Scotch. It adds a smoky flavor as close to peated whiskey as you can get, while the drink remains legally a beer by definition. The third, less obvious: inoculate the quadruple with wild Brettanomyces yeast in the final week of conditioning. It adds a leathery, almost barnyard note that tasters describe as funky, and completely changes the character of the drink in just 2 weeks. An unexpected direction: apply the same freeze concentration technique used for cider, but to barley wine wort before fermentation rather than to juice. Freeze the wort, pour off the concentrated fraction, and get a stronger, denser ale without a single extra kilogram of malt. Each of these variations is effectively a different drink at the end, with a different flavor profile and a different place at the table. One more variation home producers rarely try: buckwheat honey. It's darker, with a pronounced mineral, almost malty flavor, and after fermentation to 18%, the result smells less like dessert wine and more like a young rum distillate, though the technique remains the same: simple fermentation. The difference in the source material matters more here than any difference in process, which is exactly why it's worth trying honey from different regions. Right now, in the United States, there are over 1 million home brewers and winemakers, and not one of them has the legal right to distill even a liter of wine, even though fermenting mead, ale, or cider for personal use has been permitted since 1978. Demand for craft barley wine and mead is meanwhile growing faster than any other drinks category. People are searching for the flavor complexity that whiskey monopolized through the price of entry into barrel production. Interestingly, the industry is already moving in the other direction. Some brands now finish their distillate in barley wine barrels, because the flavor of craft beer has become of value even for those who spent centuries loyal to the cask. The law isn't changing any time soon, but while it stays as it is, each of these 5 drinks is a legal way to get at home what others pay for in a bottle marked aged 18 years.